Elena Martinez had always been drawn to the old mansion on Blackwood Hill. As a pediatric nurse working the night shift at St. Mary's Hospital, she often drove past the crumbling Victorian estate on her way home at dawn. The locals whispered stories about the place, how it had been abandoned for decades, how strange lights flickered in the windows during storms, how no real estate agent dared to list it for sale. On this particular October morning, something was different. As Elena's car rounded the familiar curve, she noticed the front gate hanging open, creaking in the autumn wind. She had never seen it anything but tightly sealed with heavy chains. Her nursing instincts, honed by years of caring for vulnerable children, made her slow down and peer through the morning mist. That's when she heard it, a sound that made her blood run cold and her heart race simultaneously. The unmistakable cry of a baby, weak and desperate, carried on the wind from somewhere within the mansion's grounds. Elena pulled her car to the side of the road, her hands trembling as she turned off the engine. Every rational part of her mind screamed warnings, but her professional training and maternal instincts overruled her fear. She had dedicated her life to helping children, and no amount of local superstition would stop her from responding to an infant in distress. The wrought iron gate groaned as she pushed it open wider. The path leading to the mansion was overgrown with thorny vines and dead leaves that crunched beneath her feet. Gothic gargoyles perched on the corners of the building seemed to watch her approach with stone eyes that felt too real in the dim morning light. The crying grew louder as she climbed the front steps. The massive wooden door stood slightly ajar, and Elena could see nothing but darkness beyond the threshold. She called out, her voice echoing in the stillness. "Hello? Is someone there?" "I'm a nurse. I can help." No response came except for the continued wailing of the baby, now clearly coming from somewhere deep within the house. Elena pushed the door open and stepped inside, using her phone's flashlight to illuminate the way. The beam revealed a grand foyer with a sweeping staircase covered in dust and draped with cobwebs. Portraits of stern-faced ancestors lined the walls, their eyes seeming to follow her movement. Following the sound of crying, Elena made her way through a maze of corridors lined with antique furniture covered in white sheets. The mansion felt alive around her with settling wood and distant echoes that made her question every step. But the baby's cries pulled her forward like a beacon. Finally, she found herself standing before an ornate door at the end of a long hallway. The crying was coming from the room beyond, accompanied now by what sounded like whimpering. Elena knocked gently. "I'm coming in," she announced softly. "I'm here to help." The room she entered took her breath away. It was a nursery, but unlike any she had ever seen. The walls were painted deep midnight blue, with silver stars that seemed to shimmer in her phone's light. An antique crib made of dark mahogany sat in the center, surrounded by toys that looked both ancient and expensive. But what truly shocked Elena was the scene before her. A tiny baby, perhaps 6 months old, lay crying in the crib. The child was pale, almost translucent, with the most beautiful silver hair Elena had ever seen. But what made her gasp was the baby's eyes. When they opened to look at her, they glowed with an otherworldly amber light. Beside the crib, a massive black wolf paced anxiously. When Elena entered, the wolf turned to her with intelligent eyes that held an almost human desperation. Instead of growling or showing aggression, the creature whined softly and nudged toward the baby as if asking for help. Elena's medical training kicked in immediately. Whatever supernatural elements were at play, this was clearly an infant in distress. She approached slowly, speaking in the soothing voice she used with all her young patients. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, reaching into the crib. "I'm going to take care of you." The moment her hands touched the baby, she felt a strange warmth spread through her fingers. The child was cold, too cold, and when Elena lifted the tiny form, she realized with growing alarm that the baby was severely malnourished. The infant's cries had grown weak, indicating dangerous dehydration. The wolf watched intently as Elena examined the baby with practiced hands. She checked for fever, looked at the child's gums, and felt the soft spot on the head. All signs pointed to a baby who had been without proper nutrition for days, possibly weeks. "Where is your family, sweet baby?" Elena murmured, but she was beginning to understand that conventional help might not be available. The wolf's presence, the baby's unusual appearance, and the supernatural atmosphere of the mansion all pointed to circumstances beyond normal experience. Elena's phone had no signal inside the mansion, and she realized she was truly on her own. But as she looked down at the struggling infant, her resolve strengthened. She had taken an oath to help those who couldn't help themselves, and this baby desperately needed immediate care. The nursery had all the equipment one might expect: bottles, blankets, even what appeared to be a changing table. But there was no formula, no milk, nothing to feed a starving infant. Elena checked every drawer and cabinet, growing more frantic by the minute as the baby's cries grew weaker. That's when she remembered the small cooler in her car. She always kept emergency supplies for her long shifts: sandwiches, fruit, and a small carton of milk that she sometimes added to her coffee. It wasn't ideal for a baby this young, but diluted and warmed, it could provide the nutrition this child desperately needed. "I'll be right back, sweetheart," she told the baby, surprised when the wolf seemed to nod in understanding. "Watch over the little one." Aylin ran back through the maze of corridors, her phone light bouncing off the walls as she retraced her steps. The morning sun was higher now, casting long shadows through the mansion's windows and making her mission feel even more urgent. Every second counted when dealing with a severely malnourished infant. She retrieved her supplies from the car and hurried back, finding the wolf exactly where she had left it, standing guard beside the crib. The baby's cries had grown even weaker, which terrified Elena more than loud wailing would have. Working quickly, she mixed a small amount of milk with warm water from a thermos in her bag, testing the temperature on her wrist just as she would for any patient. The wolf watched every movement with intense focus, and Elena had the strangest feeling that the creature understood exactly what she was doing. "Okay, little angel," she whispered, lifting the baby carefully. "Let's get some nutrition into you." The moment the makeshift formula touched the baby's lips, the change was miraculous. The infant latched onto the bottle with desperate hunger, making small sounds of contentment as Elena fed slowly and carefully. She had to pace the feeding to prevent the baby from getting sick, but she could already see color returning to the pale cheeks. The wolf settled down beside Elena's chair, its massive head resting on enormous paws. But its eyes never left the baby. There was something almost human in the creature's expression: relief, gratitude, and what looked like profound sadness. As Elena fed the baby, she found herself talking to both the infant and the wolf, her voice filling the supernatural quiet of the mansion. "There we go, sweet one. That's much better, isn't it? You're going to be just fine. Someone loves you very much. I can tell. They wouldn't have such a beautiful nursery if they didn't care." The baby's eyes began to flutter closed as nutrition and warmth worked their magic. Elena had seen this transformation countless times in her career, how quickly children could bounce back when given proper care. But there was something special about this particular infant, something that went beyond the unusual appearance. As she burped the baby gently, Elena noticed that the child's skin was warming to a more normal temperature. The amber glow in the tiny eyes was fading to a more natural color, though they remained the most striking golden brown she had ever seen. The wolf had moved closer, close enough that Elena could feel the warmth radiating from its large body. Up close, she could see that this was no ordinary wolf. Its fur was lustrous black with silver highlights, and its size was far beyond any wild wolf she had ever heard of. But most remarkably, there was an intelligence in its eyes that seemed almost human. "You're protecting this baby, aren't you?" Elena asked softly. The wolf's ears perked up, and it made a low sound that was almost like a response. "You've been trying to take care of the little one, but you don't know how." Elena had always had a way with animals, but this felt different. The wolf seemed to understand her words, responding with different vocalizations and movements that felt like communication rather than mere animal behavior. As the morning progressed into afternoon, Elena settled into a routine of caring for the mysterious infant. She fed the baby every 2 hours, changed makeshift diapers from cloth she found in the nursery drawers, and checked vital signs regularly. The improvement was remarkable. Within hours, the baby was stronger, more alert, and beginning to show the natural curiosity of a healthy infant. The wolf never left their side, and Elena began to think of the creature as a partner in caring for the child. When the baby cried, the wolf would alert Elena with a gentle nudge. When Elena needed supplies from another part of the nursery, the wolf would position itself protectively over the crib. But as evening approached, Elena knew she faced a difficult decision. She couldn't stay in the mansion indefinitely, and she couldn't take the baby without knowing more about the situation. Yet leaving felt impossible. This child clearly needed ongoing care, and there was no one else to provide it. The wolf seemed to sense her dilemma. As shadows lengthened through the nursery windows, the creature became increasingly restless, pacing to the door and back again, making soft sounds that Elena interpreted as urgency. "What is it, boy?" she asked, for she had begun thinking of the wolf as male. "Are you worried about something?" The wolf's behavior became more agitated as darkness fell. It would go to the window, rear up on its hind legs to look out, then return to Elena with what appeared to be growing anxiety. Something was expected to happen, and the wolf knew what it was. Elena had just finished feeding the baby again when she heard it, a sound that made every hair on her body stand up. From somewhere in the distance came a howl, long and mournful, filled with a pain so profound that it seemed to shake the very foundations of the mansion. The wolf beside her answered immediately, its own howl echoing through the nursery and beyond. But this wasn't a call, it was a response, almost like a conversation across the darkness. The baby in Elena's arms stirred but didn't cry. Instead, the infant seemed to listen, those unusual golden eyes wide and alert. Elena realized with growing amazement that the child recognized these sounds, found comfort in them rather than fear. "Someone's coming, isn't it?" Elena whispered to the wolf. "Someone you've been waiting for." The wolf's entire body language changed. Where before there had been anxiety and protectiveness, now there was anticipation mixed with what Elena could only describe as hope. The creature moved to the window again, and this time Elena joined it, still holding the baby. Through the glass, she could see the mansion's grounds spread out in the moonlight. The ancient trees swayed in the night wind, and somewhere in that darkness something was approaching. Elena couldn't see it yet, but she could feel it, a presence powerful enough to make the very air around them seem to vibrate with energy. The baby made a soft cooing sound, reaching tiny hands toward the window as if recognizing something Elena couldn't yet perceive. The wolf's tail had begun to wag slightly, the first truly joyful gesture Elena had seen from the creature all day. Whatever was coming, it meant something important to both the baby and the wolf. Elena found herself caught between fear and curiosity, her arms tightening protectively around the infant while her eyes strained to penetrate the darkness beyond the window. The howl came again, closer this time, and Elena realized that after a day of caring for this mysterious baby, she was about to meet whoever, or whatever, the child truly belonged to. The wolf's excitement was palpable now, and even the baby seemed to be responding to the approaching presence with anticipation rather than distress. Elena took a deep breath, understanding that her life was about to change in ways she couldn't yet imagine. But as she looked down at the healthy, content baby in her arms, a child who had been starving and near death just hours before, she knew she had made the right choice in stopping to help. Whatever supernatural forces were at work in this mansion, whatever otherworldly family this baby belonged to, Elena had done what she was called to do. She had saved a life, and that was what mattered most. The sound of footsteps on the mansion's front porch echoed through the building, slow and deliberate. The wolf's entire body quivered with excitement, and the baby's golden eyes fixed on the nursery door with an intensity that seemed far beyond the capabilities of such a young child. Someone was home, and Elena was about to discover just how extraordinary this night would become. The footsteps grew closer, echoing through the mansion's corridors with a measured pace that spoke of both weariness and urgency. Elena held the baby closer, her heart pounding as the wolf positioned itself between her and the door, though its posture suggested protection rather than aggression. When the nursery door finally opened, Elena's breath caught in her throat. The man who entered seemed to fill the entire doorway with his presence, though he moved with careful, controlled steps. He was tall and lean, with sharp aristocratic features and skin that held the same pale luminescence she had noticed in the baby. His hair was black as midnight, and his eyes, those same golden amber orbs that had captivated her in the infant's face, held a mixture of desperate hope and barely contained anguish. But what struck Elena most was not his otherworldly beauty or the obvious supernatural nature of his being. It was the look of pure, devastating grief that crossed his features when his gaze fell upon the baby in her arms. "Lucian," he whispered, his voice carrying an accent she couldn't place, rich and melodious despite the pain it contained. "My son." The wolf bounded to the man's side, pressing against his legs with obvious joy and relief. The stranger's hand fell to the creature's head, his fingers trembling as he stroked the dark fur. "Thank you, Marcus," he murmured to the wolf. "You protected him. You kept him safe." Elena watched in amazement as the man's attention turned fully to her and the baby. There was nothing threatening in his approach, only a desperate father's need to see his child. She found herself stepping forward rather than back, drawn by the obvious love and anguish in his expression. "He was starving," Elena said softly, her nursing instincts overriding her fear. "Severely malnourished and dehydrated. But he's much better now. I've been feeding him diluted milk every 2 hours." The man stopped several feet away, his hands clenched at his sides as if he were fighting the urge to reach for the baby. "You saved him," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "I can smell it on him, the return of health, the end of hunger. You saved my son's life." "What's your name?" Elena asked, though something in her already knew this was no ordinary father. "I am Adrian Blackthorne," he replied, and the name seemed to carry weight in the air around them. "And this is my son, Lucian. I am more grateful than you could possibly understand." Elena studied his face, noting the exhaustion that seemed bone deep, the way his eyes never left the baby, and the careful distance he maintained. "How long has he been alone?" Adrian's expression grew even more pained. 3 weeks, he admitted. "I was called away on urgent business that I could not refuse, affairs of my kind that required my immediate attention across the ocean. I left him with his nursemaid, but when I returned tonight, his voice trailed off and Elena saw his hands clench into fists. She was gone," Elena finished, understanding beginning to dawn. "She abandoned him. The woman I trusted with my most precious possession fled in the night, taking nothing but gold from my safe. She left my son alone in this vast house with only Marcus to watch over him." Adrian's voice carried a fury that made the air around them seem to vibrate, but when he looked at the baby, it softened immediately. "Marcus tried to care for him, but a wolf cannot prepare formula or change diapers." Elena looked down at the baby in her arms, little Lucian, who was now sleeping peacefully, his tiny hand curled around her finger. "He's beautiful," she said simply. "And he's going to be fine. Children are resilient, especially when they're loved." Adrian took a hesitant step closer. "May I? Would it be possible for me to hold him? I have been traveling for days without rest, desperate to return. When Marcus's howls reached me at the airport, I knew something was terribly wrong." Elena found herself nodding without hesitation. There was nothing in Adrian's demeanor that suggested danger, only a father's desperate love for his child. She moved closer, carefully transferring the sleeping baby into his father's arms. The transformation in Adrian was immediate and profound. His entire body seemed to relax as Lucian settled against his chest, and Elena watched in fascination as the baby's unusual coloring seemed to brighten in response to his father's touch. It was as if they were connected by something deeper than ordinary family bonds. "Hello, my little prince," Adrian whispered, his voice tender in a way that made Elena's heart ache. "Papa is here now. I'm so sorry I was away. I will never leave you again." Lucian stirred in his father's arms, opening those remarkable golden eyes to gaze up at Adrian's face. The baby made a soft, cooing sound and reached up with tiny fingers to touch his father's cheek. Elena watched in wonder as Adrian's eyes filled with tears that glittered like diamonds in the nursery's soft light. "He knows you," Elena observed, moved by the obvious bond between father and son. "We are connected in ways that most people would not understand," Adrian said carefully, his gaze meeting Elena's over Lucian's head. "I felt his distress even from thousands of miles away. It called to me, pulled at my very soul until I could think of nothing else but returning to him." Elena nodded, somehow understanding that she was witnessing something extraordinary. "What happened to his mother?" she asked gently. Adrian's expression grew distant and sad. "Isabella died when Lucian was born, complications that even my resources could not prevent. It has been just the two of us since then, along with Marcus and a small staff of those who understand our nature." "Your nature," Elena repeated, though she was beginning to piece together the truth from a dozen small clues. Adrian's pale beauty, the way he seemed to glide rather than walk, the baby's unusual appearance, even the wolf's obvious intelligence. "You are not afraid," he observed with surprise. "Most humans would have fled by now." "I'm a pediatric nurse," Elena said simply. "I've seen a lot of things that others might find frightening or unusual, but more importantly, I see a father who loves his son and a baby who needs care. Everything else is just details." Adrian's smile was the first genuinely warm expression she had seen from him. "You are remarkable, Elena Martinez." She started in surprise. "How do you know my name?" "Your hospital ID badge," Adrian explained, nodding toward the lanyard around her neck. "Though I would have found a way to learn it regardless. I owe you a debt that can never be repaid." Elena watched as Adrian moved around the nursery with practiced ease, clearly intimately familiar with every detail of his son's care. He checked Lucian's diaper with the expertise of an experienced parent, noted the empty bottles and feeding supplies Elena had used, and assessed his son's improved condition with the keen eye of someone who knew exactly what to look for. "You have been feeding him every 2 hours," Adrian observed, examining the notes Elena had made on her phone to track Lucian's progress. "Yes, small amounts to avoid overwhelming his system. He was severely dehydrated when I found him. I was worried about refeeding syndrome, so I've been very careful about quantities and timing." Adrian's respect for her knowledge was evident in his expression. "You saved his life with your expertise as well as your compassion." "Another few hours and—" He couldn't finish the sentence, but Elena understood. She had seen enough malnourished children to know how quickly a baby could decline without proper nutrition. "He's strong," Elena assured him, "and now that you're here, he'll recover completely. Though," she hesitated, unsure how to voice her concerns, "though you wonder about his unusual dietary needs," Adrian finished for her, his perception seeming almost supernatural. "You are right to be concerned. Lucian is not entirely human, though he appears so now. As he grows, his needs will become more specialized." Elena nodded thoughtfully. She had suspected as much from the moment she saw the baby's glowing eyes and felt the strange warmth of his skin. "Will regular milk and formula be sufficient for now?" "For the immediate future, yes. His supernatural nature is still dormant. It will not fully manifest until he is older. For now, he needs the same care as any human infant, though perhaps with more attention to protein and iron in his diet as he grows." Adrian settled into the rocking chair beside the crib, still holding Lucian close. The baby had fallen asleep again, clearly comforted by his father's presence. Marcus the wolf had positioned himself beside the chair, his intelligent eyes moving between Adrian and Elena as if following their conversation. "I must ask," Adrian said quietly, "what you intend to do with this knowledge. You have discovered something that my kind works very hard to keep secret from the human world." Elena considered the question seriously. She could report what she had seen, try to convince authorities that there was a supernatural family living in the abandoned mansion on Blackwood Hill, but she knew how that would sound, and more importantly, she had seen nothing that suggested any danger to anyone. Just a father caring for his son with the help of an obviously intelligent and loyal companion. "I don't see that it's any of my business," she said finally. You're not hurting anyone. You're just trying to raise your child and live your lives. Everyone deserves privacy and safety. Adrian's relief was palpable. You truly are extraordinary. Most humans would demand explanations, or flee in terror, or try to exploit what they had learned. I'm not most humans, Elena replied with a small smile. I'm a nurse. My job is to help people, not judge them or create problems for them. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both watching Lucian sleep peacefully in his father's arms. Elena found herself fascinated by the obvious love between father and son and by the strange family unit they formed with Marcus the wolf. There was something beautiful about it, despite its unconventional nature. "May I ask," Elena said eventually, "what you are exactly? I mean, I have my suspicions, but—" Adrian smiled, and for the first time, Elena caught a glimpse of elongated canine teeth. "I am what your stories would call a vampire, though the reality is quite different from most human legends. I am very old, and I have responsibilities to my kind that sometimes require long absences. I thought Lucian would be safe with trusted staff, but I was wrong. And Lucian is half vampire, half human. His mother was human like you. He will grow up mostly human until adolescence, when his supernatural nature will begin to manifest more strongly. Until then, he needs the same love and care as any child." Elena nodded, finding that the revelation didn't change how she felt about the situation. If anything, it explained the extraordinary bond she had witnessed between father and son and the obvious intelligence of Marcus. "What will you do now?" she asked. "You can't leave him alone again, and finding trustworthy childcare for a supernatural baby can't be easy."
Adrian's expression grew troubled. "I don't know.
My duties to my kind cannot be ignored, but I cannot risk Lucian's safety again. Tonight showed me how close I came to losing the most important thing in my existence." Elena found herself speaking before she had fully considered her words. What if you didn't have to choose? Adrian looked at her intently. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if Lucian had a caregiver who already knew about his nature, someone with medical training who could handle any unusual situations that might arise? Someone who has already proven that they can provide the care he needs?" The silence that followed was charged with possibility. Elena could see Adrian processing her implied offer, hope and caution warring in his expression. "You would consider caring for Lucian?" he asked carefully, "even knowing what he is, what I am?" "I would consider it," Elena said honestly. "I would need to know more about what would be expected, about his specific needs as he grows, and there would have to be clear boundaries and agreements about safety and privacy. But I've never felt more needed or more useful than I did today, taking care of him." Adrian's eyes closed briefly, and when he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "You cannot know what this would mean to me, to be able to fulfill my obligations to my people while knowing that Lucian is safe, cared for by someone who understands his nature and has the skills to help him thrive." "It's just an idea," Elena said quickly. "We would need to discuss details, arrangements, all sorts of practical matters." "Of course," Adrian agreed. "But the fact that you would even consider it, after everything you have learned tonight," he looked down at Lucian, who had stirred slightly in his sleep. "My son seems to have chosen his guardian already. He has never been so calm with a stranger." Elena watched as Lucian's tiny hand curled around one of Adrian's fingers, and she felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with supernatural influences. "He's a special little boy. He deserves someone who will protect that. As do you deserve protection and support for such a commitment," Adrian said seriously. "If you were to accept such a position, I would ensure that you were compensated generously and that you had all the resources you needed. My wealth is considerable, and Lucian's safety and happiness are worth any price." Elena nodded, understanding that this was a life-changing decision. But as she watched Adrian hold his son, as she remembered the feeling of feeding a starving baby and seeing him recover, as she looked at Marcus the wolf who had tried so hard to protect the child he couldn't properly care for, she knew her heart had already decided. "I would need to give notice at the hospital," she said slowly, "and I would want to start gradually to make sure this arrangement works for everyone." Adrian's smile was radiant. We could begin with day visits, gradually increasing as you become more comfortable with our household and our ways. There is a guest suite here that could be prepared for you whenever you feel ready for that step. Elena looked around the beautiful nursery, imagining herself as a regular part of this supernatural family's life. It should have terrified her, but instead she felt excited about the possibility. "I think," she said quietly, "this could work." Lucian chose that moment to wake up, his golden eyes opening to look directly at Elena. The baby made a soft sound and reached toward her with tiny fingers, as if he too approved of the arrangement being discussed. Adrian carefully transferred his son back to Elena's arms, and she marveled again at how natural it felt to hold the extraordinary child. "I believe," Adrian said with wonder in his voice, "that fate brought you to us tonight. Lucian was meant to find you, and you were meant to find us." Elena looked down at the baby in her arms, then up at Adrian's hopeful face, then over at Marcus, who seemed to be following the entire conversation with obvious approval. Whatever strange path her life was about to take, she knew it would be filled with purpose and meaning in ways her previous existence had never offered. "When do we start?" she asked with a smile. 6 months later, Elena could hardly remember what her life had been like before Lucian entered it. The transition from hospital nurse to supernatural nanny had been smoother than she ever could have imagined, though it had certainly been filled with surprises. The Blackthorn mansion had been transformed under her influence. What had once been a dark, imposing structure filled with shadows and secrets now felt like a true home. Elena had insisted on opening curtains during the day to let in natural light, had filled rooms with fresh flowers, and had gradually convinced Adrian to modernize certain aspects of the house for Lucian's safety and comfort. The kitchen, which had been largely unused for decades, now hummed with activity as Elena prepared meals not just for Lucian, but often for Adrian as well. She had been surprised to learn that vampires could eat human food, though they didn't require it for nutrition the way humans did. Adrian had confessed that he had forgotten how much he enjoyed the simple pleasure of sharing meals until Elena began cooking for the household. Lucian himself had thrived beyond all expectations. At nearly a year old, he was a happy, healthy toddler who was just beginning to take his first tentative steps. His golden eyes remained as striking as ever, and his silver hair had grown into soft curls that Elena loved to brush each morning. Most remarkably, he had shown no signs of the supernatural aspects of his nature beyond his unusual appearance and an uncanny ability to communicate with Marcus the wolf. Elena had kept detailed notes about Lucian's development, both as a medical professional and as someone who would need to recognize when his vampire heritage began to manifest more strongly. Adrian had been grateful for her methodical approach, sharing with her ancient texts and family records that helped her understand what to expect as Lucian grew. The relationship between Elena and Adrian had evolved as well, though neither had spoken openly about the changes. What had begun as a professional arrangement rooted in mutual respect and concern for Lucian's welfare had gradually become something deeper and more complex. Elena found herself looking forward to Adrian's returns from his various duties, and she had caught herself staying up late on nights when he was home, reluctant to end their conversations about Lucian's progress, world events, or simply their thoughts on books they had both read. For his part, Adrian had begun spending more time at home, rearranging his responsibilities so that he could be present for more of Lucian's milestones. Elena had noticed how he watched her interact with his son and how his expression had grown increasingly warm and appreciative over the months. Tonight was particularly special. Adrian had been away for nearly 2 weeks, handling what he had described as delicate negotiations between vampire covens in Eastern Europe. Elena had missed him more than she cared to admit, and Lucian had been fussier than usual. Clearly sensing his father's absence, Elena had just finished giving Lucian his evening bath and was settling him into his crib for the night when she heard the familiar sound of the mansion's front door opening. Lucian's head immediately turned toward the nursery door, and his face lit up with the kind of joy that only a child can express when seeing a beloved parent return. "Papa," Lucian called out, one of the few words he had mastered along with Lena for Elena and Mar for Marcus. Adrian appeared in the doorway moments later, still wearing the formal black clothes he preferred for his official duties, but his face already softening as he took in the scene before him. Elena was kneeling beside the crib, her hair falling in soft waves around her face as she leaned over to tuck Lucian's favorite blanket around him. "Hello, my little prince," Adrian said softly, moving into the room with the fluid grace that still sometimes caught Elena's attention. "Did you miss Papa?" Lucian's response was to hold up his arms and bounce excitedly, making it clear that he wanted to be picked up despite having just been settled for the night. Elena laughed and looked up at Adrian. "He's been asking for you all day," she said, her eyes meeting his with the easy familiarity that had developed between them. "I think bedtime can wait a few more minutes." Adrian lifted his son from the crib and Lucian immediately began chattering in the mix of real words and baby babble that had become his preferred method of communication. Elena watched the reunion with the warm satisfaction that had become familiar whenever she witnessed the bond between father and son. "And how are you, Elena?" Adrian asked, his attention turning to her as Lucian settled contentedly in his arms. "You look tired. Have you been getting enough rest?" Elena felt the familiar flutter in her chest that occurred whenever Adrian's concern focused on her rather than just on Lucian's care. "I'm fine," she assured him. "Lucian's been a little restless with you away, but nothing I couldn't handle." "How did your meetings go?" "Successfully, though I found myself eager to return much sooner than usual," Adrian admitted, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I discovered that being away from home has become much more difficult than it used to be." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks at the implication behind his words. Over the months there had been many such moments, touches that lingered a second longer than necessary, conversations that seemed to carry deeper meaning, glances that spoke of feelings neither had yet voiced aloud. "We missed you too," Elena said softly, the "we" encompassing both herself and Lucian in a way that felt natural and right. Adrian settled into the rocking chair with Lucian, and Elena found herself sitting on the small sofa that had been added to the nursery for her convenience during long nights when Lucian was fussy or sick. Marcus, who had appeared as soon as Adrian returned, stretched out on the rug between them, completing their unusual family circle. "Tell me everything," Adrian requested, his voice holding the eager interest of a parent who had missed precious moments of his child's development. "Has he taken any more steps? Has he said any new words?" Elena smiled, launching into a detailed account of Lucian's progress over the past 2 weeks. She described how he had successfully walked from the sofa to the coffee table in the living room, how he had begun to show preferences for certain toys, and how he had started to demonstrate an uncanny ability to find hidden objects, as if he could sense them in ways beyond normal human perception. "And yesterday," Elena said, saving the best for last, "he did something really extraordinary. Marcus was in the garden, and Lucian was in his playpen by the window. Marcus started barking at something, probably a rabbit, and Lucian made this sound back to him. Not a word exactly, but like he was responding in Marcus's own language. And Marcus stopped barking and came to the window to look at him, almost like they had been having a conversation." Adrian's eyebrows rose with interest and a touch of concern. "His supernatural abilities are beginning to manifest earlier than I expected. That's not necessarily problematic, but it's something we'll need to monitor carefully." Elena nodded, having anticipated this reaction. "I've been keeping detailed notes about any unusual behaviors or abilities. So far, it's mostly been animal communication and an unusual awareness of his surroundings. Nothing that seems dangerous or difficult to manage." "You continue to amaze me with your thoroughness and adaptability," Adrian said, his voice warm with admiration. "Most people would be frightened by such developments. Most people haven't had the benefit of understanding what to expect." Elena replied, "And besides, he's still just Lucian to me. Super hearing or supernatural intuition doesn't change the fact that he needs his diaper changed regularly and gets cranky when he's hungry." Adrian laughed, a sound that had become much more frequent since Elena had joined their household. "You have a gift for keeping things in perspective." They continued to talk as Lucian gradually grew drowsy in his father's arms. Elena found herself studying Adrian's face as he spoke about his travels and duties, noting the way his expression had become more relaxed and content over the months. The haunted look that had been present the night she first met him had gradually faded, replaced by the confidence of a man who no longer feared for his child's safety and well-being. When Lucian finally fell asleep, Adrian rose carefully to place him back in his crib. Elena automatically moved to help, adjusting the blankets and checking that Lucian's favorite stuffed animal was within reach. It was a routine they had performed together many times, but tonight it felt charged with additional meaning. As they stood side by side looking down at the sleeping child, Elena became acutely aware of Adrian's proximity. She could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could hear the steady rhythm of his breathing, could smell the subtle cologne he wore mixed with the scents of night air in distant places. "Elena," Adrian said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking Lucian. She turned to look at him and found his golden eyes focused on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. There was something in his expression that she had been seeing more and more frequently, a mixture of gratitude, admiration, and something deeper that neither of them had yet acknowledged. "Yes," she whispered back. "I need to tell you something that I should have said months ago," Adrian continued, his voice low and serious. "What you have done for Lucian, for me, for our family, it goes far beyond the professional arrangement we originally discussed." Elena's heart began to beat faster as she sensed that they were approaching a conversation that would change everything between them. "Adrian, please let me finish," he said gently, reaching out to touch her hand with careful fingers. "You have given Lucian something I could never provide on my own, the experience of being part of a true family. You have brought warmth and light into our lives in ways that I didn't even realize we were missing." Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she listened to his words. The past months had been the most fulfilling of her life, but she had been afraid to hope that Adrian might see her as more than just a capable employee. "You have become essential to us," Adrian continued, his thumb tracing gentle patterns on the back of her hand. "Not just as Lucian's caregiver, but as the heart of our home. I find myself thinking of you when I'm away, looking forward to your smile when I return, treasuring our conversations and the way you make everything feel like it has meaning and purpose."
"Adrian," Elena said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I feel the same way."
"These months have been incredible. Taking care of Lucian, being part of your lives, it's shown me what I was missing in my old life. I never knew I could feel so complete, so needed, so loved," Adrian suggested quietly. Elena's eyes widened at the word, but she found herself nodding. "Yes, loved and loving." Adrian's smile was radiant as he lifted his free hand to cup her cheek. "Then perhaps it's time we stopped pretending that what has grown between us is merely professional appreciation." Elena leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly at the tenderness in his gesture. When she opened them again, she saw her own feelings reflected in Adrian's golden gaze. "What exactly are you saying?" she asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "I'm saying that I love you, Elena Martinez," Adrian said clearly, his voice filled with certainty and wonder. "I love your strength and your compassion. I love the way you sing to Lucian when you think no one is listening. I love how you've turned this mansion into a home, how you've made Marcus into a family pet instead of just a guardian, how you've given my son the experience of having a mother's love." Elena felt tears spill over at his words, but they were tears of joy rather than sadness. "I love you too," she whispered. "I love watching you with Lucian, seeing how gentle you are despite your strength. I love your intelligence and your dedication to your responsibilities. I love how you've let me become part of something so precious and extraordinary." Adrian leaned closer, his forehead touching hers. "Are you certain? Being with me, truly being with me, means accepting a life that will never be entirely normal. There will always be supernatural elements, always be duties and responsibilities that others wouldn't understand." Elena smiled through her tears. "Adrian, I've been living that life for 6 months already, and it's been the happiest time of my existence." I don't want normal if it means losing this, losing you and Lucian and even Marcus and this beautiful, impossible life we've built together. Then there's one more thing I need to ask you, Adrian said, his voice taking on a formal tone that made Elena's heart skip. Elena, would you consider not just caring for my son but officially becoming his mother? Would you marry me and make our family complete in every sense? Elena's breath caught as the magnitude of what he was asking settled over her. Marriage to Adrian would mean not just accepting his supernatural nature, but binding herself to it, becoming part of the vampire world in ways she had never considered. But as she looked at his hopeful, vulnerable expression, as she heard Lucian make a soft sound in his sleep, as she felt the rightness of standing here in this nursery that had become so dear to her, Elena knew there was only one answer she could give. "Yes," she whispered, her voice filled with love and certainty. "Yes to all of it, to marriage, to motherhood, to whatever life we can build together." Adrian's joy was unmistakable as he lifted her off her feet, spinning her around once before setting her down and capturing her lips in a kiss that sealed their commitment to each other and to the extraordinary family they had created. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and smiling. From his crib, Lucian made a happy gurgling sound, as if he approved of the developments even in his sleep. "When?" Elena asked, her practical nature asserting itself even in the midst of such an emotional moment. "Soon," Adrian promised. "Though there will be certain formalities required by my kind, certain rituals and ceremonies that will make you officially part of our world." Elena nodded, finding that the prospect of supernatural wedding traditions excited rather than frightened her. "Will it change me, physically, I mean?" "Not unless you choose it," Adrian assured her. "Marriage to a vampire doesn't automatically confer immortality or supernatural abilities. Those would be separate decisions, made when and if you ever decide you want them." Elena considered this, realizing that such choices might become important as years passed and Adrian remained unchanged while she aged. But those were concerns for the future. Tonight was about the commitment they were making to each other and to Lucian. "I want to adopt him officially," Elena said suddenly. "I want him to be my son, legally as well as in our hearts." Adrian's smile was brilliant. "I was hoping you would want that. Lucian deserves to have both parents' names, both parents' protection and love." They stood together in the peaceful nursery, making quiet plans and promises as their sleeping son rested safely nearby. Elena marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. From a lonely nurse driving home from her shift to a woman who had found her true calling and the love of her life in the most unexpected circumstances. "Do you ever regret stopping that morning?" Adrian asked, as if reading her thoughts. Elena looked around the nursery at the evidence of the life they had built together. Lucian's toys scattered on the carpet, family photos on the dresser. Her own belongings mixed comfortably with Adrian's and Lucian's. She thought about the joy she felt every morning when she woke up in the mansion, the satisfaction of caring for Lucian, the excitement she felt whenever Adrian returned from his travels. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. That crying baby led me to everything I never knew I wanted." Adrian pulled her close, and Elena settled into his embrace with the contentment of someone who had finally found her place in the world. Whatever challenges their unusual family might face in the future, whatever supernatural complications might arise as Lucian grew and developed his abilities, Elena knew they would face them together. As if sensing the happiness surrounding him, Lucian smiled in his sleep, one tiny hand curling around the edge of his blanket. Elena and Adrian watched their son together, two people from different worlds who had found love and purpose in protecting and nurturing the remarkable child who had brought them together. The mansion on Blackwood Hill, once a place of shadows and secrets, had become a true home filled with love, laughter, and the promise of extraordinary tomorrows. Elena had saved a starving vampire baby with nothing more than milk and compassion, and in doing so she had found her own salvation and the family she never knew she needed. Their story was just beginning, but Elena knew with absolute certainty that whatever adventures lay ahead, they would face them as a family. vampire father, human mother, supernatural child, and one very intelligent wolf who had brought them all together on a morning when fate intervened in the most beautiful way possible. She soothed the vampire king's deserted, starving baby with milk. He came back at the last moment.